Well, I thought I was going to be bringing you a video of doing some work to this truck. This belongs to a friend of mine. It's a Peterbilt, and he recently took it to someone. So Mr. George took this to somebody to have some work done, and they mounted this tank on here. It's a 4,000 gallon tank, and this tank, when it's loaded, can weigh up around 44,000 pounds plus the tank itself. So he took it to a guy to have this tank mounted. So they added this double frame and then proceeded to mount the tank. If you've ever hauled liquid in anything, it doesn't take long to realize that you don't want that tank moving at all, because the liquid will move forward and back, side to side, and any little movement starts working on all the fasteners of whatever is holding it. So you need to make sure that it is secured to the truck very well. So he brought this to me, wanting me to simply put some lights on it. Get all the lights wired so that he can start using the truck. And unfortunately, my dilemma is the fact that I don't believe this truck should be on the road hauling 44,000 pounds of liquid, sloshing side to side, front to back on what's here. There's several things that must be fixed. Some things I think are just my preference, and I don't have a problem distinguishing between the two. And I know my preference doesn't mean it's not safe. I know I like to do things a certain way. And not everybody thinks that that's necessary. And that's okay with me. But just like the person who did this and the person who owns it have their right to their opinion and what they want to do, so do I. And the more I looked at it, the more I didn't want to be involved in this at all. I just don't think things like this should be on the road. And if I do anything to make this able to be on the road, this is cracked right here, then I'm contributing. It's cracked there, 1/8 inch. And I don't want any part of that. I don't think there's enough holding this, and I don't think what's here is done well enough for it to pull this kind of load. So there's those problems, and there's more. You notice there's one piece of truck frame here. There's nothing else. There's those little plates. So there's nothing to keep this thing from going, the tank from shifting side to side on the frame. There's two pieces of truck frame on the other side, one on this side. I'll show you the rest. Alright, so he had the frame stretched just in front of this hanger for this lift axle, and then he had this lift axle installed. This lift axle, I now have the truck aired up. As you can see, that bag is overinflated. That bag has 125 psi of air in it. The plumbing goes from the tank to a valve in the dash straight to here. So what's happening is these are getting 125 psi of pressure, and the front drives are getting hardly anything because this one is overtaking and lifting. So the ride height valve on these will put it in hold because this has it so overextended. This axle is not mounted correctly. This is a air down spring lift tag axle or pusher axle. I think it was used as a pusher before. I'll show you in a minute why. But this bracket needs to be 3.5 or 4 inches lower. You can see the angle of this, how steep this arm is that comes down, is way too steep. So that needs to come down quite a bit, and there's supposed to be a cross member that goes from one side to the other, and it's not there. That's supposed to keep the lift axle from twisting the bottom of the frame. There's supposed to be one back here as well. It's not there. Oh boy. So it's a lift axle by spring. So when you release the air, the spring is caged in here. Well, I guess when the spring is relaxed, it's extended. It pulls on a rod right here with a pivot down here. So when it pulls on it, it cams over this way and lifts off this chain. When it comes up, this bump stop should be close to the frame, and that should be resting in here up against the internal bump stop in that bag to keep the axle from bouncing around. This spring's supposed to have enough tension to do that. Well, unfortunately, when you have the spring compressed so much farther than it needs to be, we're putting a lot of undue stress on that spring. Here's a splice. They put the frame together, and like I said, they're way overextended. I'll show you what I mean here. So we have no cross member here, and if you can see this, I mean, that hose is so stinking tight, both the same way, and that's because it's overextended. These airbags, like I said, they go, the air comes from a tank up to the dash, and then to the valve in the dash, just inflate or deflate, and it comes back here to these. They teed it off back here, just a T, and it's just zip tied. Same thing with the T for the brakes. They're just service brakes. They're not spring brakes. And if you can see here, there's the pad where the cross member should go from one side to the other, which isn't here. And then we have, there's just so much it needs fixed. There's a lot. This is what is feeding this airbag here. And the best part, if you follow this Horner's line right here, this is what feeds these brakes back here. They've teed it off. The service brakes up there. If you're gonna add another axle of brakes, you're adding capacity of air. So this chamber and this chamber require more air. They're going to draw more air. So you shouldn't just tee off of existing. It needs to have another air tank, a bigger air tank, and possibly even a higher CFM air compressor. When you add a lift axle, you do it because you need more capacity. If you need more capacity, obviously you need more brakes to compensate for the capacity. So they've just come off of those and teed in. So what you have here is those are coming off a relay valve. The front one's coming off a relay valve. But that axle is only getting half the volume that the front axle is getting, because it's splitting it between here and here. That should have been controlled off another relay valve back here, and the relay valve controlled off the signal that controls both of those. That's what it should have been, not just tagged in. So if I sound frustrated, it's because I am. It's the friend of mine that owns a truck does not want to do all this over again. He does not want to take the time nor the money to make all this right. And I'm at a point where if I put lights on the back of this, which is what I asked me to do, then I am knowingly putting this on the road, knowing that it's not right, and in my opinion, not safe. If you're going to splice a frame, put your cross member on either side of your splice with mechanical backups, not right at the edge. I disagree with so much of what's been done here. I just don't. I'll be honest, I just want to tell them, come get it. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to touch it because what I've found and the way it's been done, I don't want anything to do with this. So I guess the next step is I'm going to call him and we're going to have a conversation, because in my opinion, all the hold downs to the tank need redone. The axle needs either changed out to the correct one, or these mounts need dropped. I don't know if you can still buy these mounts. This is a new way lift axle, and I don't know if they're even available. That's nice. Yeah, those are crooked. The bag mounts are even crooked. Crooked and too high. It's not even supporting the bag. Lord. The more you look, the worse it gets. Anyways, looks like I need to give my friend a call and see what we decide here, but I don't have time for this. I don't have time to do all this. I have other things more important. Man, there's so much work to do here and so much time. So many of these bolts need replaced. Beating a dead horse here. Let's make a phone call. Well, that truck is no longer in my driveway. I called the friend of mine that owns the truck, and I expressed my concerns and what I think was in need of repair, what's in need of an upgrade, and what needs to be just completely redone. And his exact words were, "I do not have the time, the money, or the want to fix all these little things you think are wrong on this truck." So I told him, I said, "That's fine, that's your choice. Just understand that it's your choice to not fix the stuff, it's my choice to not want to be part of that truck or anything that's going to put it on the road. So I told him he should just take it back to the guy that did all the work. So it's back at his house, and I guess that's what he's going to do. So he called the guy that did the work, and apparently there's some kind of lack of communication here on what I thought and all that kind of stuff. So he had that guy call me. So the guy that did the work works for a big corporation. He's a fleet mechanic working on their trucks. Their trucks are tandem axle, air braked, and they have lift axles on them. And he asked me what I thought was wrong with it. So I began to explain, and I started with that where the tank mount is in the front. And I just went over that, you know, what was done to secure that tank, I believe was inadequate and poorly done. And his response was, the guy that they got the tank from said that's how it was secured to their truck, which I don't think that has anything to do with, you know, your responsibilities to make sure it's secure. What somebody else said doesn't matter. So I told him that, you know, I thought the front mounts, well, actually all the mounts were inadequate. The one on the passenger side front, the tank's not even touching the frame. He said that that tank is twisted and they had to draw that down just to get it that close. Well, that doesn't alleviate the responsibility of making sure that tank is sitting flat front to back and secure. So whether it needed something to be built to take up that space or whatever, that needed to happen, because imagine that 34,000 or 30 whatever it is pounds of liquid in that tank, not just moving back, not just the weight itself, but moving back and forth, which multiplies the force that could be acted upon. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to think that that could come closer as they hit bumps and go on down, you know, going down the road and whatever, or coming to a stop. So when you hit a bump like that, that front attachment being that one single bolt with that huge space in between, I mean, I assume they were looking for some type of maybe flex for the frame or something. That's why they had that space in there, but it makes no sense to me, the stack of washers underneath it. I believe there's more money in washers on that truck than there is in the proper bolts. The nuts that are on the bottom, look, they were just regular nuts. They weren't lock nuts. They didn't have a tack weld on them. They weren't nylocks. So think about if that thing came forward and that tank closed that gap up, it wouldn't be unreasonable to think that that nut could come loose or come off. Once it does, it puts all that stress that that bolt was holding now on all the others, and it becomes a house of cards. The one on the driver's side front, that again, you know, it was there's just a small amount of weld on the back side of that mount, and the one that's on the front is less than fantastic, and so that one's going to be taking up a lot more stress. And once that would fail, because now the movement is more prevalent, you know, once that one fails, now you're back to the rear, that plate on that side that's an 1/8 inch plate that's already got a big wear spot in it and a crack, and it's only 1/8 inch plate. So then that one would soon fail, or it's like a house of cards. You know, you lose one, then the others are could potentially fail very, very quickly. And I told him I believed his mounts were inadequate. There wasn't enough there, but also I believe that they welded them to that second frame they added, but you could see the second frame was pulling away from the main frame because there was no mechanical fasteners there to keep that second frame attached to the main frame. I mean, not to mention it's pulling it across, but in time that's just going to crack. So anywhere you have movement with the added stress and weight of that fluid going back and forth, it just multiplies and magnifies. So, you know, all that stuff that's on there I thought was just inadequate, and he disagreed. They both did. They both thought it was fine. And I said, you know, them bolts that you have holding that down with that great big space on there, I mean, for Pete's sake, they're on an angle, so they're only touching on just the corners of the head of the bolt and on the nut. So you know, that strength of that bolt is drastically reduced, and the potential for failure is much higher because it's not pulling straight like it's intended. It's pulling off the corners. You know, the likeliness to bend that bolt or snap that bolt is far higher, far greater in that situation than it is straight. So I told him I think that needs to be redone, and I talked about the rear lift axle and how the air pressure goes straight from the air tank to a valve right to the airbags, and how that's just not how it should be done. I mean, if you were pulling the same load all the time, you could probably get away with a ride height valve to adjust the air in them bags, but most of them you'll see with next to the seat here would be a valve to control it with usually a gauge to tell you how much pressure is in the bags, along with a little adjustable regulator so you can decrease and increase pressure as your load changes. And he said that his at work that they work on, they don't have any of that. I don't know if maybe they have a pressure regulator before the valve coming off the tank that reduces the pressure to a maximum PSI or not, but still, it's regulated. It's not 125 PSI. That's, I mean, you're just pulling, you lift the back of that up, you know, you're pulling all that weight off the drives, and in the wintertime in Northeast Ohio, that's a bad idea. I mean, the idea of the lift axle is to compensate for some weight to take it off of the drives that are over, but you can't just put full 125 PSI on it, because then you're pulling the weight out, too much weight off the drives, you're losing your traction. Anyway, so you lose your braking as well. So now what happens is, instead of those two drives having good effective braking because they have good weight on them, now they have a lowered amount of weight on them and more on the rear, which only has, he's only going to run the one outer tire. And not only that, we talked about the CFM. I said, you know, maybe the trucks you guys get already are upfitted with a larger storage tank for the brakes. Maybe not, and maybe a bigger air compressor. But, you know, the point is, regardless, that you can't add something like that to something that's not spec'd for a lift axle and not add more air capacity, or even possibly a larger CFM air compressor. And he, you know, his response to most of this was, look, I just did what the guy asked me to do as cheap as possible. And I guess if that's the standards you live by, then I guess you succeeded, but I'm just not going to do it. I'm not willing to do that. I mean, this is why I don't work on trucks for people for money, because far too often they want to focus on the cost of things, not necessarily as much of the safety or the reliability. And to me, when I work on people's vehicles that you see me do for free, it's because I have control over how it gets fixed, and I can make sure it's done what I think it needs to be done, and done proper. Not that there isn't a better way or someone out there who knows better than I do. It's just the fact that when you're dealing with someone who wants to have you do work on their truck, you know, if they're working on a limited budget, they'll pass over things that really shouldn't be done. And we have an opportunity before we start this work to say yes or no. And I mentioned the airbag hangers on that Peterbilt airleaf system, that arm that had the holes rusted through it in the cracks, and he said he told the owner about that because he saw it before they even started. Well, see, to me, that's the exact time. If he doesn't want to repair that, there's no need to go forward, because it's not going to get any better. Because if he's not willing to repair that, other safety issues that come up, he's probably not going to be interested in doing. So, anyways, I thought I was going to bring you a good video, what have you, but I didn't. Life got in the way. But I choose not to have any part of putting that truck on the road in its current condition, because I know very well if I would have put lights on the back of that truck, he'd be running that truck down the road today. And it's his choice. He can do what he wants, but I don't want no part of it. There was places on the frame, like I said, where the front, those hangers, those mounts that they made with them big long bolts in it, where they were pulling away from the frame. You know, that's movement, man. That's awful. And yeah, I just don't want no part of that. It's just awful. So I just decided to let him take it back to him, do whatever, just leave me out of it. I might be overreacting, being a big baby about it or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's my name that goes on that. Nobody's going to stop and say, no, 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 JC didn't do that work. He didn't have anything to do with that. It'll be like, this failed, and he was the last guy to see it. We're just not going to have that. So, anyways, thanks for watching.